Hey guys, welcome to the Calvinist Contradiction. Again, we're here today with another episode of Where is Calvinism in the opening narrative of the Bible? And we do that because we believe if Calvinism is the truth, then it should be clearly, coherently, and consistently seen in the opening narrative of the Bible, in its context and in its original context. And so, a couple announcements we want to make. First off, is we have a book coming out on the 17th of September. This is not a specific Calvinism book. This is a theology book about the New Testament doctrine of the Trinity found in the Old Testament, the roots of it found in the Old Testament, and it's a Advent devotional. So it's pretty short. It's only 60 pages. It's supposed to be reflected on over the weeks of Advent. So it's broken down into 5 teachings, one for every week of Advent, going over the ancient Israelites' view of Yahweh as 2 powers in heaven. And so that's Yahweh, the invisible one, and then Yahweh revealed through a theophany of a man. And so it's in its review stages right now. So we'd love to give it away for you for free in exchange for a review on Amazon. And some of you guys have reached out to me, and we can't thank you guys enough for reaching out, reading and reviewing. We actually have somebody who from this channel reached out, and she's helping me edit it one more time since it's only me and my wife who have been editing it. I edited it. She looked at it. Things have gone, we've missed stuff. And so they're helping us. We can't thank you guys enough for your support. But if you'd like a free copy, please email me at the description below at thecalvinistcontradictioncom at gmail.com, and we'll get you a free copy in exchange for a review. And also, we can't thank you enough for your comments in the comment section. I try to respond to those as much. I think in the future, we're going to move down to 1 teaching a week or 2 Monday and Fridays. And then in the middle of the week, we'll have like a comment response, just video. And that way we can kind of try to do it earlier with a live feed. But thank you for your comments. Thank you for liking. Please subscribe and pray about joining my ministry over here financially. We are in Asia Minor, sharing the love of God for everybody. We're in this country right here. And so it's the most unevangelized place on the planet. And so please pray about supporting our ministry over here. Without further ado, today it's going to be fun. We're jumping into Genesis 41, and we're asking the question, is Calvinism found in the text? Not going back into Romans 8 and 9. So, Basil, I'm mentioning something before I get into the text here. So don't try to, deceive people that I'm jumping into Romans like you did in your teaching. We're saying you don't have to jump into Romans and come back here and teach out of this. You don't have to go to Exodus and teach out of here. You could and you should in many cases, but we're saying for finding a biblical theology that holds water, that's not a steaming pile of dung, not trash heap theology, we should read it in its context, and then we'd be able to place our theology back where it says it's originated from, like Calvinism does, Reformed theology does with Genesis 3, but none of its adherents can place it. Its origins can place it coherently, concisely, clearly back into those texts without going and reading somewhere else back into the text. So we're going to look at this today. And of course, this is a continuation of what we learned last time in Genesis 40. And so it says, now it happened at the end of 2 years. So remember, the guy forgot about, going back, Basil, not going forward, going back to the last one. It says, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So it says for 2 full years. So that it happened at the end of 2 full years. So we're jumping forward in time here in the story. That Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and grazed in the marsh grass. Then, behold, 7 other cows came up from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. And Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second dream. And behold, the 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then, behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by an east wind, sprouted up after them. And then ears swallowed up the 7 lumps in full ears. The Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt and all of his wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but they were unable to interpret them to Pharaoh. So there's a couple things here that'll be prevalent in the future when we're reading through the Bible as a narrative. And of course, Pharaoh on the banks of the river is going to go off in everybody's head about other places in the Bible. East wind should be something that we store in the back of our mind because that comes up a lot. And then even these magicians, or we can have magician in our head like we would think, but really the priests, and this becomes prevalent especially later in Exodus. And so it's not just magicians as we would think. Actually, if you watch whenever the Exodus narrative comes up, we will talk about this. And hopefully it gets close to even when Easter is and when Passover was, because it's a really good movie, The Prince of Egypt. And they do a good job representing this. His magicians were actually kahin, or they are actually like, what will we call it? They're priests in the, systematic. So that's just a little in the Egyptian belief systematic. And so, like I said, that will be prevalent for when we get to the Exodus narrative, but it's setting up theological constructs that the writers who used literature as a device to teach us what the Bible says, because they don't believe that, this book is just like toilet paper, it's just like this receipt, it's just like Madame Blavatsky's satanic work, Aleister Crowley's satanic work, or Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, or my daughter's drawing right here, as much as I love it. It's not inspired by God in the same way that it's inspired here. And we're going to see this clearly and plainly in this text, that this is from God. And we know that because of what it tells us about this. We would not say, as the Calvinist, as Reformed theology proper says, that everything, every meticulous thing that ever happened, everything that happens is meticulously controlled by God. So the Satanic Bible is just as inspired by God for his glory as this is under Calvinism proper. And that's not the case. And so we want to take note of these ancient Near Eastern things that we're running up against that we're going to see later in the text that I'm pointing out to you, and just Bible as narrative, as literature. And so we'll come across these like the east wind, that comes and that plays a big part in the Exodus narrative later with like Jonah and stuff like that. And so we're pointing this out to say that they're building a theological construct here that they're going to use throughout the Bible. And, Pharaoh on the banks of the river, they're going to pick up on these things, however it goes down, whether it's just Moses telling and reusing these things, whether it's editors later to make it a more compelling and, unified story, however it goes down, it's all from God. It's all directed from God, and it's all for his glory, literally. That's what we believe, to help us to know what he does. And so that's what we're saying is when it tells us here, like Joseph's about to do, so let's get in here, it tells us what is from God and what's not from God, so we don't have to assume Calvinism, that just everything, even the killing of innocent babies horrifically through Lucy Litsby, is from God for his glory. That's just baloney sausage, trash heap theology, and you are free, and you should ignore anybody that tells you otherwise. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Well, what's he talking about here? Just a paragraph earlier. He forgot to tell, he did not remember Joseph. Pharaoh was furious with the servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We dreamed on the same night. He and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. And just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to office, but he hanged, or but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon where he had shaved. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answered the Pharaoh, saying, It is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Yep. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile and grazed over the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, as such as I had never seen in ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, that could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. Oh, then I awoke. I saw also in a dream, and behold, 7 ears full and good came up on a single stalk. And lo, 7 ears were thin and scorned by the east wind, sprouted up after them, and the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but no one but there was no one who could explain it to me. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Oh, wait, you mean this non believer here? This guy who's not chosen before the foundation of the world, this dead man? What can a dead man do? Mr. Calvinist, Mrs. Calvinist out there says, What can a dead man do but just lay there and not do anything? Well, it seems like this dead man did a lot. It seems like he saw a dream. And then after he saw the dream, what does it say here? Then when he woke up, then Pharaoh woke up, and behold, it was a dream. And in the morning, his spirit was troubled, and he called for all the magicians, for all the priests and stuff. And so this dead man receives a dream. This dead man thinks about the dream. This dead man is concerned with the dream. And then he seeks out somebody who can interpret this dream. And so God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. But, before the foundation of the world, he's unconditionally not elected this guy. He's Pharaoh. He's God on earth in his mind. We'll get into this a lot when we get into the Exodus story. He's God on earth in his own worldview. And so, the bologna sausage theology that Calvinists kind of preach, and Derek Webb, who was of Camden Call, who's left the faith now because he's a Calvinist. And he said, well, if God wants me, then he'll make me believe. And until that happens, I'm a dead man laying on a slab that can't do anything. That's John Piper, R.C. Sproul, probably every other John Shibadama Ding Dong who's a Calvinist, and every other Calvinist without the name John who interprets dead man to mean dead according to like Lazarus, because they make that connection. They conflate that. But then they don't think about the dead man who Jesus gives the example of in a soteriological construct, where he's talking about his son who left by his own accord and who eating pig slop by his own accord says, "Why should I die? I'm going to go back to my father." And so, what is the point of all that? I'm trying to say to you is, well, if dead means dead and you literally can't do anything, Pharaoh didn't get the memo here. And we're going to see that Joseph doesn't get the memo here as the Calvinist memo here in a second too. Because what does it say? Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. So, Mr. Calvinist and Mrs. Calvinist out there who conflate sovereignty, which means the sovereign one can rule as they please, to meticulous control, and then quotes hog slop to you, like as unimaginable as it might seem for us today, from the killings of Dennis Rader, where he eats people, to the death camps at Birkenau and Auschwitz, where they killed millions of people, to the rape and sexual abuse of young children. It's not God allowing, it's him doing it for his own glory, are telling you to interpret the scriptures that way, even though they can't place their theology back to where they say it originates in Genesis 3. We went through this. It's so clearly and plainly seen in the text that you can't see it without Calvin, Henry's, Pink's commentaries. And then they, without any evidence in any of these scriptures that we've gone through for 41 chapters now, want you to interpret that God meticulously determines all things and renders that from the New Testament read back into the Old Testament. And Joseph misses the memo here. That's why they don't ever want us to read 41. They want us to read 50, and we're going to get there. But 41 destroys Calvinism. Why? Because they say sovereignty equals meticulous control, so they conflate that. They make another meaning. They always do this. They make two meanings. God's will is that all men would be saved, come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ and be saved. And they say, no, God's real will is for him to destine people to hell in the mother's womb. And so, but look what it says right here. As for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, this means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Well, Joseph, didn't you get the Calvinist memo like 5,000 years after you lived? 1,500 years, 1,000 years after the Bible canon is closed, you didn't get the memo? You, oh man, that everything's determined by God? No, he didn't. And he specifically, I mean, I don't know how more plain he could be, that this manner, that these two things, he gave you these two dreams to realize that this is determined by God and it's going to happen quickly. So get your house in order. But Pharaoh's already supposed to know that everything's determined by God. Joseph's supposed to know that. So why is he wasting his breath here? But see, this is why. Why would you read the Bible in its context? Just skip to 50. Skip to Exodus, I think it's 10 or 20. I might be quoting that wrong, but the Calvinist Holy Grail. Skip to Romans 9. Actually, let me start over. Read Romans 9, read Romans 8, and then go back and read it back into the text. No, that's not what's supposed to happen here. And we read the Bible in context because consistently we've come across things like this that just dismantles this hogwash, bologna sausage, trash heap, dung theology that you have the right to ignore anybody spouting this because they're deceiving you at the very worst and they're ill-informed at the very least. Either please ignore and find a theology that uses the Bible as a narrative in literature and takes into the when coming up with meanings for these things, take into ah, I have my host language, sorry. Takes into thinks about the context of the Bible in its context and in its original context. So takes into account, sorry. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action and appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain and food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his servants. And the Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall, since God has informed you of all of this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are." That's pretty awesome. "You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all of the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, "Bow the knee," and he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one will rise a hand or a foot in all the land of Egypt." Joseph, so Pharaoh named Joseph Zenaphpanah, and gave him Ashnath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife, and Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out in the presence of Pharaoh, and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, the land had brought forth abundantly. He had gathered all the food of the 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. Now the question here is, again, we saw Joseph isn't ascribing everything unto God, determining it. That's not in his worldview. So Calvinist, he didn't get the memo. That's because you're making it up from, just bad theology. I'll stop there. But it says here repeatedly, Joseph did this, Pharaoh did this, Joseph did this, telling us what they did. We already saw God's going to do this. God did this. God did this. And so, again, when you read the Bible as a narrative and you take into consideration what literature is and what the point of this literature is, which is for us to know what God is doing, not what we are just ascribing to him as doing, or not just what we are thinking he's doing, but what the text literally ascribes to him as doing, so that we can know who he is. That's the purpose of this text. That's what the Bible tells us is the purpose of the text. And so, again, Calvinists are at fault before they even start, because they don't believe that, because their systematic does not put that forth. It doesn't believe that. This is a manuscript for a text that I'm working on for a book, and this is not the same inspired as this is. Why? Because this was written to reveal who God is, and this is, I feel, from God, but it's not inspired in the same way. And so, again, there is the problem. There within lies the problem. You can't read the Bible as a narrative, as a story that's telling you who's doing what at when. That's how a story works. Okay. When you're just ascribing behind the scenes God doing everything anyway, it makes no sense. So you better act quickly, because why? God showed you this thing twice, and this proves that it's determined by Him. Not everything's just determined. Why is that? So you put somebody in charge of this, and we start handling this quickly. That's what God's trying to tell you. And Pharaoh's just like, well, He's determining anything anyway, because I got a brain download from 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years later. And Calvin just says it's going to be all good anyway, because we don't have free will. We don't have to do anything. And God's just wasting His breath doing this anyway. That's how we're supposed to render this? Absolutely not, because it's trash heap, dookie theology. We're supposed to, as this text says, you better do this, put somebody over. They put somebody over. He takes action. He takes action so well that he can't even count the measure of the grain that he brings in here. But there's no free will. It never says that. Well, you can't see what you can't see. Take off your Calvinistic glasses and you'll be able to see rightly. Break the chains, break the yoke. If it's money, break the yoke. Sorry, because you're defaming God's character. If it's you're pastoring a Calvinistic church, break the yoke and free the people. If you're just confused because you've abdicated your own theology over to people who really don't care about you that much, because they'll deceive you to your face, because what greater deceiver is there but the Calvinist God? Allah. Surah 7. So, dump this theology and come back to the Bible and read it as a narrative. It'll help you out a lot. I'm telling you that right now. Now, before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, and Ashna, the daughter of Potphria, priest of Un, bore him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. So he's ascribing to God something that God literally did there. We don't have to assume. And he named the second one Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. We can say absolutely. He did that, okay? He did that. We can ascribe that to God. When the 7 years of plenty, which had been in the land of Egypt, came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was a famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when the land of Egypt was famished, and the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says you shall do. When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened up the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt, and the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because before the foundation of the world, God ordained it to be like that, even though it never says that in the text, and we assume that because we read the New Testament back into the Old. We're supposed to do that. No, it says because the famine was so severe in all the earth. Okay? So that is what is going on here. Again, let's go back to the big point in here. The manner is determined by God. What's determined by God? That this is going to go down. However this happens, okay? So this is a part of Joseph rising up. But does that mean that where it never claims that this was determined by God, Joseph being thrown into a pit and his brothers wanted to murder him, all the things we talked about before this, that's supposed to be determined by God? No, because there'd be no point for that sentence right there. Everybody would know everything's determined by God all the time, 100%. And that's not the truth. When you look at why these biblical writers, why the authors were picking these words to put in here, it's easy when you think they're trying to teach you theology. But because you got your theology from some book from some pastor, some preacher, from some Calvinist creed, from some confession, from somewhere outside of the biblical narrative, which is teaching you about God in time and in space when you're reading it, you don't understand, because you're automatically ascribing all this dookie that you picked up from another place back into the text, and you're missing it. So read it like you would A Christmas Carol. Read it like you would Dracula. Read it like you would any other book. And then ascribe that this is trying to communicate something to you for a purpose, and it's effective to be able to do that, which is to know what God does and who He is. And so again, we always ask this question, and I'll end on this for you to ponder. Which one is the stronger God? The God that the Bible never says that He does, that He meticulously controls all things. We're just talking about the Joseph story right now. So He has to meticulously control all things to get Joseph to Pharaoh, to be Pharaoh, basically. He's taking Pharaoh's slot. Or the God who used all these things to get him to there. Which one's more powerful? The one that could use free will, bad decisions of others to bring forth his end result, which is to get Joseph to the place where he's at now as Pharaoh, or he has to meticulously control, deceive, kill, destroy to get there. The Calvinist God is weak, he's impotent, he's fake, he's phony, and he's false. He's not deserving of worship, and it's really just Satan in disguise. It's Gnosticism that Augustine brought over. He's 10-year Gnostic, and he brings over the demiurge with him. The true evil, the creator is evil, and then because he's controlling everything, it's a deterministic worldview as well. The one who's in obedience, Satan, actually becomes the good one, the good God. That's where this comes from. And we're saying, flush it down the toilet, get yourself a solid theology that can hold water and is tenable, unlike Calvinism. So love you guys. Again, if you want a free copy of our Advent book that's coming out soon, in exchange for a review, email me at thecalvinistcontradiction@gmail.com, and like and share this video, and we will see you next week for another episode of The Calvinist Contradiction. Love you guys. Bye.